monetizing digital services since 2004, boosting the entertainment industry by making digital content accessible for everyone. AWG, where innovation meets monetization.
Welcome to the Human Capital Leadership Podcast. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We share our own original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. Please join us often for practitioner-oriented content around all things leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with the Human Capital Leadership Podcast. Welcome to the Human Capital Leadership Podcast. In this HCL podcast episode, I talk with John Morgan about the new LHH report on the key challenges to leadership development programs and creating L&D buy-in for talent attraction and retention. John Morgan, welcome to the conversation today.
Happy to be here, John. Thanks for having me.
It is a pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from New Jersey. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about the new LHH report on the key challenges to leadership development programs and creating L&D buy-in for talent attraction and retention. There's a lot of great stuff in this report. That's what we're going to zoom in and focus in on, but we might touch on some of the other elements as well a little bit. I'm super excited for this conversation. And of course, you have a tremendous background in this area. So thank you for taking the time to share your expertise with me and the audience. As we get started, I wanted to share John's bio with everybody. John Morgan is president of LHH's Career Transition and Mobility and Leadership Development businesses and has more than 20 years of experience providing leadership advice to clients across industries on navigating economic shifts. Prior to his current role, John served as Chief Operating Officer for 3 years and helped grow LHH's revenue to all-time highs. I could talk more and more about your background, but I'm going to pause there. Anything you would like to highlight about your own professional background or personal context before we dive on in?
That's very nice. Thank you very much for the intro. And, just really briefly, I've been in the human capital industry for my whole career, for just 25 years. And I always like to think of myself as a blend of, I run a large human capital business, but I'm also a psychologist in training. So I have a master's in organizational psychology and also an MBA. So I've just always been fascinated by human behavior at work, which is really why I do what I do. So happy to be on the show.
Very good. And I'm a close cousin. I'm an organizational sociologist with a lot of social psych in there. Anyways, wonderful stuff. Great background. And yeah, that background serves you very well in this space. So again, thank you for joining me. All right. Why don't we dive on in? Give us just a little bit of background and context to this report itself.
Sure.
How this report came about, some of the components to it, and then we'll dive on in more specifically to talk about L&D buy-in and talent attraction and retention.
Absolutely, yeah. So at LHH, we really do quite a bit of research to help sort of guide the work that we do, and the work that we do is really in three areas. I mean, if you really simplify it, the work that we do is we help our companies, our clients, recruit talent, develop talent, and transition talent when they have to exit an organization. And so this study really focuses on the middle pillar, which is developing talent, how we build leaders and how we help companies, guide leadership development, investment, and programs. And so, we felt that in the world that we're living right now, which is sort of the convergence of, leadership skills changing amid AI, return to work programs kind of formulating, Gen Z entering the workforce, just really a good time to kind of take a step back and take a look at our customers and say, hey, what is working in leadership development? So that's really what the impetus was for the survey. We did, a survey of about 1,500 C-suite executives. These are C-suite leaders who are actually responsible for the purse strings of leadership development investments in their companies. And they were all large companies. And it was across not only the US, but also we looked at the UK, Canada, and Australia. So sort of all of our biggest English-speaking markets, just to kind of get a sense for, what was really working in the area of leadership development and also what were some of the challenges, right? So couple insights that we got out of this that I think we can dive into more. I mean, one, we really saw major challenges associated with change management and being agile. I mean, that was probably leadership development competency that rose to the top, but also how LD programs really impact recruitment and retention. Some geographic differences, of course, in terms of what people are doing across the different markets. And then, how do you build an LD culture and really what works? And so those are the areas that we really probed into.
Awesome. Yeah. And let's start with the geographical differences a little bit.
Sure.
Just at a high level, you just outlined several different core areas of the report. Maybe just give us a high level kind of descriptive summary of what you saw in terms of geographic differences.
Yeah, there were, obviously customs and work styles across those countries are a little bit different, but there were really two major significant differences that jumped out of the data when we looked at it. And the first one was in North America, so in the US and in Canada, the composition of leadership programs had a big focus on not just leadership, but DE&I, right? So for sure, when you compare that to the UK and the Australia and some of the other markets, we had almost 100% of leadership development programs at least having a component that was really strongly focused on DE&I. We didn't see as many programs that had that focus in the non-North American markets. So that was one thing that really jumped out. And I think the second one was that there's this success factor that leadership development programs are really only successful when they're linked with business objectives. I mean, we all kind of know this. It's a little bit of motherhood and apple pie, right? Leadership has to drive the business strategy. We found in North America, majority, 80%, felt that the linkage was pretty clear. Their programs that they were building were clearly linked to the business strategy. Outside of North America, we actually found that the result to be much less. It was less than 50% affirmed that opinion, that their programs that they were building were connected to their leadership strategies. So those were the two major geo differences that were actually called out statistically in the study that we did.
Yeah. Well, that's super interesting. And I don't want to talk about my own stuff too much, but I do a lot of comparative international work in the motivation, in the employee engagement, satisfaction, and retention space, looking, across countries and cultures. And so that is just, I'm always fascinated by that, and to see different data sets and how these differences manifest. Super, super interesting. Anything else you want to say about that generally before we dive on in more specifically to the buy-in piece?
It wasn't a huge surprise to see the DEI component obviously come up in North America, because I think, companies that are based in North America, I think, are a little bit, behind in that area, right? And I think, the focus on that is actually encouraging to see that lots of companies, despite some of the recent government rulings, by the way, which some of these programs are the question, what we're seeing in the research and anecdotally with our customers is that, almost all of our clients are really focused on building out this agenda, at least as a component of what effective leadership looks like. And that's really nice to see.
Well, let's talk about the buy-in piece here for a minute, because organizations can spin up training and development, leadership development programs. Lots of organizations have big catalogs of various training offerings, for example, but they're not always very well utilized by employees. So I think there's a big difference between having like a catalog of offerings versus having actually a strategic, plan in place and leveraging that content in a way that's actually helpful for people and for the organizations themselves. And it comes back to buy-in. What did you find in this report? What are some of those biggest challenges for C-suite leaders that they're facing when trying to generate and create that buy-in in those leadership development programs that they may have in their organizations?
Great question. And maybe start with just sort of some of the challenges that emerged in the report. So we actually talked about this question a lot. And the interesting thing was that we saw several challenges emerging getting that buy-in or even participation, or whatever you want to call it, in the program that they were actually building and trying to fund. So the 5 challenges that we saw that rose to the top, one was really sort of what they categorized was as a lack of interest in the program overall. Mm-hmm. Second was lack of awareness. Right? Third was a perception that the resources in the program were not adequate. The fourth was that piece around lack of clarity around connection to the actual business. Last was perceived lack of measurability. Right? So all the things that a CEO that they're coming to say, hey, we need to do this program. These are the questions, that the CEO is going to ask, right? I think what's really great is what are the solutions, to those that we found in the report, right? So I think one, let's start with the impact of measurability. This has been the holy grail for any program that you're going to do for a long time. How do you demonstrate to, the CEO of the company who's going to ultimately fund this, or the CFO, that you're getting value from leadership development in a quantifiable manner, and so we've made tremendous gains in the way we design programs now, because of the fact that we have the benefit of AI, big data, and lots of different digital tools that we can actually quantify things that we couldn't quantify in the past. So I'll give you the example of most leadership programs have a coaching component. Really always hard to quantify the impact of coaching, but any practices it knows that it's the single best development tool on the planet, right? But how do you quantify it? Well, now in 2023, every leadership development program has a one-on-one coaching component, and we're actually using digital platforms to measure that, so you can in a real-time way see what's the person working on and what is the connection to the behavioral competency that they're trying to gain improvement on to the actual business. And we're able to do surveys to quantify the impact of the business on dollars. And when you're able to do that at scale in a company, you get reams and reams of data. You're not just talking about 20 people going through a program. You're talking about coaching being democratized to thousands of people in a company. So you can really then come with data that's measurable. It says, here's the X to Y. Here's the impact that we've made. These volumes and getting, C-suites to invest more in leadership development. And then the other challenge is really, I think, how do you overcome this is you need real executive sponsorship to create a culture for leadership development. And I'm not talking about the CEO doing a video and saying, have at it, guys. I'm talking about, the CEO or the executive sponsor of a leadership program personally talking about how leadership development impacted them and got them to the role that they're in, and telling their story and being vulnerable. The companies that do it this way really drive then a culture of commitment to development. And that's what I think, ultimately you asked me, what's the impact on attraction and retention? And the research is clear. I mean, people want to go to companies where development is a priority. It's the number one reason why people join. It's the number one reason why people leave. So if you get executive sponsorship at the top, that's real and authentic. Then you can start building a culture where feedback's accepted, where vulnerability is accepted, and where actually, it's an honor to go to a development program and not a chore. So.
Yeah, that's a big key there. It's an honor, not a chore. And I've seen that in so many organizations where it really is seen as this instead of additive element to help you do your job better and to help you have opportunities for advancement in the company, it actually is a distraction. It takes your time. It takes you away from your normal job. You don't really see the clear benefit of being involved in it. And of course, employees aren't going to be as excited about being involved in that kind of a program. And of course, C-suite executives aren't going to be excited about that program because the ROI is not going to be there for them.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, very cool. And so you started to touch on that, the impact on talent recruitment and retention, just briefly. Let's delve into that a little bit more. You mentioned, how everyone wants to go work for an organization that has a commitment to learning and development that's going to help them develop further in their career and have opportunities for growth and advancement. I think pretty much most people want that in their careers and in their jobs. I do think most organizations and most leaders see that as an important component and that they want to offer that. Yet that sincerity piece that you've mentioned a couple times now is really important. I think many C-suite executives, they want to be an advocate for these types of programs. They want to be a supporter of them, yet it doesn't come across that way, based on how they're manifesting their support. So, taking good intentions, that's good, but how do we translate, good intentions over to actually impactful practice in generating that kind of perception of C-suite level support for an L&D program to get people more excited for it?
Yeah. Well, I think it goes by, not only, as we said, being a visible advocate, not just once, but continuously. But also, I think, the investment talks at the end of the day. So, not just making sure that a leadership program is not for C-1 and C-2 only, right? I mean, if you're really trying to build a leadership development culture, you have to offer real development to every stage of the company. So our best clients that do this really well are really segmenting their employee populations, and when they're visibly putting investment into saying, hey, the competency that you need for leadership at a early stage, a mid stage, and a more seasoned executive stage are different, right? And we're going to develop different learning journeys and different experiences based on those competencies, so that you, from the moment you start here or the moment that you enter here, that you're clear on what your actual leadership development path looks like. And I think that's the other big reason why people leave a company is career path becomes unclear, right? When career path is not clear or development isn't valued, I mean, that doesn't keep people out of company, even if you throw money at them often, right? So I think, leadership support at the top, again, so like we said, it's not just about turning up on the video. It's not just about making a speech once. I mean, it's, money talks, and putting the investment into the program at all levels. And I love what a lot of our clients have done. I use the example of coaching a lot because it's one of the most visible investments that you can give to everybody. Like, you can actually democratize coaching and make it everybody in the organization. And, that's how you build a culture of development. And I think that's, the best way that an executive can prove that he or she believes in something is just to make it available and encourage people to use it. And again, make it a normal part of your cadence. You're getting up in your town hall, highlight the people that have been promoted, that have gotten out of these programs, like really just, again, make it an honor at all levels, not just the top.
Yeah. And you mentioned having those unique pathways. What I've seen, at least traditionally in the past, in the training and development world, the learning and development world, and leadership development world, is that you tended to have these kind of rigid pathways for people, but organizations are much more agile. Or at least they need to be much more agile now. You talked about change agility. And so what that means is you need more agile pathways. You need more personalized and unique pathways. You need to allow people to develop their own pathways. That makes sense. That's complicated, obviously. And if you're in a large organization, that's going to be a challenge. But when we're thinking about the future of work and the talent shortage and the skills shortage and upskilling and reskilling people, a big part of the conversation is how do we create these unique pathways for individuals? Because as you mentioned, you can throw money at someone for a while to keep them around, but if they feel like they've stagnated in their career, even that money's not going to keep them around. And I've seen many organizations where they basically just admit it. They're like, yeah, we really don't have anything for you, so good luck. And they're basically saying goodbye. We're not willing to put in the work to try to keep you. And of course, people don't stick around in that environment.
Exactly right. And what's funny about that is that I've seen that a lot as well. We are starting to see it a little bit less because there is definitely there's more of a shift to what we call internal career mobility, but it's really employment, right? Because there's so many open jobs that companies actually can't fill. I mean, it's a really interesting labor that we're dealing with right now, where you have on one hand, you have a lot of large publicized tech downsizings, and on the other hand, you have 3.5% unemployment in the U.S. And there's people looking for jobs, and there's jobs looking for people, is what I always say. And so companies are starting to realize that they gotta, like, that comment about like, hey, we don't really have anything for you anymore. It's really costly problem. It's a really costly problem to have to keep hiring and releasing. It's much cheaper, right, to invest some money on some people, help them grow in their career, and like actually help them understand, here are your top 5 skills today, and here are your skill adjacencies that you can actually develop, because these are the new jobs that we're trying to fill, and we'd rather fill them with you than have to go outside. More and more companies are actually doing that. So my hope that problem that you just described starts to get solved at least a little bit, because there's nothing worse than you're having a career conversation and you're like, well, your track here is over. Like, I mean, it's you want people to be, leaving as friends. You don't want people to leave that way,
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think it is shifting. It is changing, in part just out of necessity, because the nature of work is changing. The nature of organizations is changing. There is a lag, though, and there's a lag in a lot of organizations to adjust to this change. And so, for anyone in the audience today, that's something to think about. Like, what are you doing in your organization in relation to your L&D practices to foster this kind of an environment where people can pivot within the organization? Of course, that's always happened. There's always been instances of that, but it's been more rare. In the future of work, it's going to be more and more common. And if you're going to want to keep good people, you're going to have unique pathways developed with those individuals to help them progress and continue to grow in their careers. Something else I wanted to touch on for a few minutes before we wrap up is, this return to office mandate that has become all too common in many organizations. What have you found in your study around those office mandates? How does that map with the continued economic uncertainty? And how does the culture of leadership development play into all of this?
Yeah, it's actually the culture of leadership development is a key method to help solve, I think, the sort of issue that we have with return to work right now in the U.S. particularly, because it's not much of an issue, right? That's one thing in the study. Not as much of an issue outside of the U.S. You probably have seen this in your research as well, where in continental Europe, everybody's in the office pretty much every day, right? So when you think about in the U.S., where we were headed even before the pandemic to a bit more of a hybrid model anyway, then it was exacerbated. Our research is really interesting. What we found is that right now, people just don't like extremes, right? So on the one hand, this is well documented, the mandate, especially in financial services right now, to be in the office 5 days a week. That's not going over very well. And, my prediction is pretty clear is that, if it continues to go down that route, there'll be some retention issues. There's no doubt about it, because the labor market is still really strong, right? On the other hand, on the other end of the spectrum, the idea that you can work every day in a virtual environment and be connected to the culture of a company is also not realistic, right? Here's what also doesn't work and what people don't like. And I always say this to our customers. It's like work happens in between meetings. Work doesn't happen in the meeting, right? Work happens after the meeting. That's when actually people get things done. And, so the idea that you're going to have a virtual environment where you encourage people to come in just for a team meeting once a month or twice a month, that's not really building culture, building communication, collaboration. That's just getting people to see each other and then, go back to their homes. So I don't think that works either. I read the other day, there's a customer that we work with, JB Smucker. They do the jam and peanut butter. And they have a really novel concept that I could actually see taking off. They have this idea in their headquarters where they have this basically this core week concept where you have 22 weeks out of the year, I think it was, in the office in their core weeks. They're basically every other week for the most part, except for the summer. And they're finding 80% of the people are in. They're going into the office, right? Because they've got the flexibility. So it's not like 2 days a week or 3 days a week. It's this sort of core week, and you manage your work in that cycle. And it seems to be really taking off pretty well, actually. So I think, the research is pretty clear. Hybrid is what people want, right? They don't want they want hybrid. Coming up with a structure for hybrid is really where the challenge is. And, I think leadership culture is actually a really key part of it, because I think the way to get people back into the office is to say, listen, if you want to grow and develop as a leader in this company, you need to build the relationships, you need to collaborate with people. And, as great as the tech tools are, we're humans, and that kind of has to happen in an office setting, at least some level, right? And so I think designing our programs where at least a component of it is in person, that's then facilitated by a lot of great technology tools, whether it's self-directed learning, whether it's virtual coaching, virtual peer circles. But when you're learning as a cohort, spend some time together in the office, because leadership development should mirror work at the end of the day, right? And how work actually happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And that flexibility piece is key, right? You've mentioned that a couple times. So
Exactly.
Whatever the hybrid version of work looks like in your organization or within particular teams and segments of the organization, there needs to be an element of flexibility there, and it needs to be adapted to the needs of your team, right? Of your organization. There's not a one size fits all here. And so that's the thing I chuckle about. When I see these big, CEO mandates, like an Elon Musk Twitter or X mandate, that everyone comes back in, it's kind of a one size fits all thing. I chuckle at that. I'm like, that's kind of dumb. Certainly his right to do that, but is that going to be as effective as it could be if you took more of a unit or team level approach to the needs of the people. The other thing you mentioned at the very beginning about the DEI stuff and that component to training and development. One of the really great things about flexibility and the remote work world is there's actually been a lot of really positive DEI impacts for organizations and for people who might have be employees from traditionally marginalized communities to have more opportunities. The flip side of that is if they're completely remote, then you can actually disproportionately negatively impact their ability to develop and grow within the organization because they don't have that one-on-one mentoring. They don't have the FaceTime. They don't have those organic interactions that happen in the workplace. So this is it's a challenging thing that you just have to balance and work out within your team. And again, no one size fits all.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Well, John, this has been a real pleasure. I note the time and I need to let you go here in just a minute. But before we wrap things up for today, I wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, and then give us the final word on the topic for today.
Yeah, absolutely right. So I'll give us the final word on the topic, and then I'll leave you with the how to connect with me. I think the one thing is really that rose to the top of the study also is really this notion of change and agility and how people need to develop leadership skills that to manage change and agility. And we found that really rising to the top. Over 90% reported agility and responding to organizational shifts as a leadership development challenge. So all the listeners, if you're building leadership development programs and you're really trying to figure out what the competencies are, make sure that you're addressing that whatever way makes sense in your organization, because it's a really key leadership development component right now. You can reach me if you like at john.morgan@lhh.com. I'm happy to, reach out to any of your listeners and viewers to talk about leadership development or to talk more about LHH and the work that we do and the research that we do. Our website is lhh.com, and just thrilled, John, that you had me, and I'm happy to come back and talk about any of the work that we do at LHH in the future. So thanks again.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. You're welcome back anytime. I encourage the audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what John and his team at LHH can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week.
Monetizing digital services since 2004. Boosting the entertainment industry by making digital content accessible for everyone. AWG, where innovation meets monetization.